Canada is quietly reshaping the balance of power in North American defense. While Washington insists that Ottawa finalize its commitment to the F-35, Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking the debate in an entirely different direction, slowing the process, questioning long-held assumptions, and backing a Canadian-built alternative where it matters most. This isn't hesitation, it's a strategic reset.
For more than a decade, Canadian governments have treated the F-35 like an unavoidable destiny, a choice that simply had to be made because everyone else in NATO seemed ready to fly it. But the landscape has changed. Carney's government has reopened the evaluation process, extending the timeline, widening the analysis, and placing Sweden's Gripen E back on the table. This unexpected revival of the competition caught Washington off guard. Inside the U.S., officials in the Trump administration are becoming visibly impatient. Analysts close to the Pentagon have described Canada's pace as disruptive and inconvenient, especially as NORAD planning for the Arctic enters a critical phase. But Ottawa, for the first time in years, is unapologetically taking its time. The Carney government insists that Canada will not be rushed, pressured, or boxed into a multi-decade fighter commitment based on another country's political calendar.
There are several reasons why Canada is slowing down, and almost all of them are rooted in today's political reality. Trump's second term has brought tariff volatility, supply chain friction, and a clear willingness to use economic coercion against allies. With that backdrop, signing a massive U.S. defense contract without careful evaluation would be reckless. A fighter jet program lasts 40 years. A bad policy out of Washington can last a weekend. The alternative on the table, Sweden's Gripen, is no longer seen as a symbolic protest option. Defense planners note that Gripen was designed for operations in harsh climates, from frozen runways to remote bases, conditions that mirror the Canadian Arctic more closely than those of most NATO countries. Gripen maintenance crews can operate with smaller teams and simpler equipment, and the aircraft's turnaround time is significantly faster in contested or dispersed environments. These are practical advantages for a nation that must defend vast territory, not just dense airspaces near European borders. Still, the F-35 has its own undeniable strengths: unmatched stealth capability, advanced sensor fusion, and deep interoperability with NATO allies. The question is not which aircraft is better when placed under a microscope. The question is which aircraft aligns most closely with Canada's long-term interests, not America's immediate expectations. And that is the heart of the Carney government's entire approach. Carney is building a doctrine of strategic autonomy. Canada will work with the United States, but not as a passive junior partner. It will evaluate American systems, but it will also consider alternatives. Most importantly, it will not allow Washington, especially under a president whose policies shift aggressively from month to month, to dictate decisions that shape Canada's defense posture for decades. This is why the F-35 debate no longer exists in a vacuum. It sits inside a broader shift in how Canada understands sovereignty. And the clearest evidence of that shift appears in the second half of this story. Just as the Americans increased public pressure over the fighter program, Carney's government announced a decision that dramatically reframed the conversation. Ottawa approved a major purchase of 6 Bombardier Global 6500 aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force, a deal worth more than $700 million. These jets will replace the aging fleet of Challenger aircraft and serve a wide range of missions: medical evacuations, humanitarian response, command and control operations, and Arctic deployments. But the true significance goes far beyond their role in the sky. Every one of these aircraft is designed and assembled in Canada. More than 60 domestic suppliers contribute to the program. Hundreds of highly skilled Canadian jobs will be supported. For the first time in years, a major defense procurement is doubling as an industrial strategy to strengthen Canada's own aerospace backbone.
This is where Carney's approach becomes unmistakable. Instead of responding to U.S. impatience by accelerating an American purchase, he responded by investing in Canadian capability. At a moment when the United States is escalating tariffs and applying pressure at the negotiating table, Ottawa chose to reinforce its own industrial foundations rather than deepen its dependency. The Bombardier decision is a quiet but powerful statement. It demonstrates that Canada is perfectly willing to spend on defense, but not automatically in the direction Washington prefers. It also proves that Canada can build world-class aircraft of its own, and that maintaining this domestic expertise is itself a core component of national security. A country that cannot manufacture its own advanced airframes becomes vulnerable, not just militarily, but economically. For the United States, the optics are uncomfortable. Washington has grown accustomed to allies who default to American equipment. Seeing a G7 country and a neighboring NORAD partner assert its independence is a reminder that American leverage isn't what it used to be. It is even more striking given the timing, arriving just months before the 2026 USMCA review, where leverage will matter more than rhetoric. Carney's emerging doctrine is becoming clear. Diversify trade partners, diversify defense partners, support domestic industries, and avoid putting all strategic eggs in the Washington basket. Canada is not turning away from the United States, but it is making sure that partnership does not become dependence. In a world where alliances are tested by political volatility, that is not just smart policy, it is survival. By reopening the fighter jet debate and refusing to bend to U.S. pressure, Carney has signaled that Canada will define its military future on its own terms. And by investing nearly $1 billion into Bombardier, he has shown that defense procurement can double as an industrial renaissance that strengthens sovereignty at home. Canada now stands at a crossroads that is bigger than F-35 versus Gripen. It is a moment where the country must decide whether its defense posture will be shaped by old assumptions or by the realities of a new geopolitical era. So here's the question for viewers. Should Canada lock itself into the U.S.-built F-35 or embrace a strategy that preserves maximum independence for the decades ahead? And perhaps the more important question is this: are we witnessing the moment Canada steps out of America's shadow and begins building a defense identity that finally stands on its own?
Is that whether you like it or not, I certainly don't mind it, is that Donald Trump has chosen to like Mark Carney. When you look on a relative basis to the rest of the world, we came out relatively unscathed. Most of the products that Trump slapped tariffs on, most of them are covered by the trade agreement and weren't affected by the tariff war.
Donald Trump didn't suddenly wake up one morning and decide he likes Mark Carney. He didn't have an epiphany, and he certainly didn't develop a new admiration for Canada. What happened was much simpler and far more revealing. He backed off because the cost of attacking Canada became too high. In an interview that caught the attention of every serious watcher of North American politics, economist David Rosenberg said something you almost never hear from a U.S.-focused analyst. Whether you like it or not, Donald Trump has chosen to like Mark Carney. And the moment you examine the economic conditions underneath that statement, the message becomes unmistakable. Canada's fundamentals have strengthened so quickly and so visibly that even Trump understands he can't afford a trade war with Carney's Canada. This is the story of how Canada quietly forced Washington into a strategic retreat, and why Trump is now acting as though he never wanted a fight in the first place. David Rosenberg's latest analysis outlines a dramatic shift in how financial markets now view Canada. After years of sluggish performance, the Canadian dollar has risen to a 3-month high against the US dollar. The Bank of Canada, despite pressure from tariffs and global uncertainty, has kept its policy rate steady at 2.25%. Meanwhile, the U.S. Federal Reserve has been cutting rates to stabilize a slowing American economy. This divergence alone has created an upward pull on the loonie. Rosenberg also notes that Canada's terms of trade have improved. Resource prices are rebounding. Global demand for base metals is climbing. Oil prices are showing renewed strength. All of this has given Canada the kind of economic momentum that political strategists in Washington did not expect. The real twist is Rosenberg's revelation that Canada effectively dodged a bullet because Trump chose not to push ahead with the aggressive reciprocal tariffs he had been signaling earlier this year. The public explanation was that Trump likes Mark Carney. But the deeper truth is that Carney's Canada, with stronger fundamentals, a rising currency, and increasing investor confidence, is no longer a country that Trump can bully without consequences.
If you look at Washington's tone over the past year, a pattern becomes clear. Trump is bold when he believes he has leverage. He is combative when he sees weakness, but he retreats the moment a fight becomes too costly for the United States. That is exactly what happened here. Earlier in the year, Trump's advisors were preparing an aggressive tariff package targeting Canadian steel, autos, lumber, and even potash. Markets were bracing for a trade war that could have posed real challenges for a small, open economy like Canada's. Instead, the White House suddenly de-escalated. No big announcements, no public victory lap, just a quiet step back. By December, the data told the story. The Canadian dollar was strengthening, the Bank of Canada was holding firm, investors were shifting capital northward, and Canada's export profile, especially in energy and base metals, was stabilizing faster than analysts anticipated. Trump didn't walk away from confrontation out of affection. He walked away because Canada's position made escalation dangerous for U.S. consumers, U.S. inflation, and Trump's own political standing. Carney didn't outshout Trump, he outperformed him.
Rosenberg also emphasized something Washington can't ignore. Mark Carney's budget received the best economic grade Rosenberg has given any Canadian government since the Harper years, and that wasn't because of clever messaging. It was because Carney introduced a sharp, productivity-driven, pro-growth strategy that strengthens the country's industrial base while recalibrating immigration to support real per capita growth. Investors noticed immediately. Over the past 2 months, global tech giants have expanded data center operations in Canada because electricity is more stable and more affordable than in the U.S. Midwest or U.S. South. Energy companies are restarting projects previously put on hold. Manufacturers are taking advantage of Canada's rising competitiveness. All of this reinforces a simple reality. Canada today is not the vulnerable partner it once was. The White House knows it, markets know it, and Trump reluctantly knows it too.
Still all upset about the 51st state and, a lot of the stuff that Trump has said in the past. But the reality is that when you look around the world, we came out actually a relative winner from the Trump tariff file.
The irony should not be lost on anyone. Trump used tariffs as his signature weapon, the tool he believed could bring allies and rivals alike to their knees. Yet Rosenberg argues that, on a relative basis, Canada actually emerged as one of the winners in this tariff era. Most Canadian exports to the United States were protected under the trade agreement and were never hit by Trump's duties. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers faced rising costs, U.S. manufacturers absorbed higher input prices, and U.S. inflation worsened. Trump's tariff strategy hurt his own economy more than it hurt Canada's. This is the kind of strategic miscalculation that no president wants to admit publicly. And so, when the time came to justify his lighter-than-expected approach toward Canada, Trump simply framed it as a personal choice. He likes Carney. But markets understand the truth. Carney's Canada simply had the stronger hand. When currencies move, they reveal political realities. The rise of the Canadian dollar is not happening in a vacuum. It reflects increasing confidence in Canada's economic direction, a recognition that Canada's fundamentals have strengthened, and a growing belief that Canada is becoming a safer destination for capital compared to Trump's turbulent United States. Rosenberg even notes that the Canadian dollar remains undervalued, meaning the market still has room to shift further in Canada's favor. At the same time, Canada's per capita growth, after years of being held down by unsustainably high immigration levels, is finally positive again.
In economic terms, that is a powerful message. In geopolitical terms, it is even stronger. Canada is not just surviving Trump's tariff threats, it is emerging from them with a clearer sense of its own strength. The most important point is this: Trump did not choose to like Carney. He chose to avoid a losing fight. Markets, investors, and policymakers on both sides of the border see what's happening. Canada is stabilizing, Canada is gaining ground, and Canada is reshaping its role inside North America. Carney didn't win through confrontation, he won through confidence, policy, and economic performance, which, in politics, is the most convincing argument of all. Trump can say he likes Mark Carney if it makes the story easier to tell, but the real narrative is much larger. Canada is rising, its currency is strengthening, its policies are landing, and its economic momentum is forcing even the most combative president in modern American history to think twice. The question for the months ahead is straightforward. As Canada's leverage grows, how many more times will Trump be forced to like decisions he never wanted to accept?
Tech stocks represent almost half of the value of all American stocks. And American stocks, by value, represent more than half of all stocks on the planet. Whoa! Are we putting too much money into this? Is the AI bubble about to burst?
Here's the truth no one in Washington wants to say out loud. If the US AI bubble pops, it won't just take down Silicon Valley, it could send shockwaves through the entire American economy. And at a moment when President Donald Trump is betting his second-term economic story on soaring tech valuations and AI hype, Canada is quietly building something far more durable: real power, real resources, real national sovereignty.
Stocks and AI, because, and this is crazy, more than a third of stock value on America's main stock index, the S&P 500, comes from just 7 tech companies, all heavily invested in AI.
CBC's investigation recently posed a blunt, almost unsettling question. If the AI bubble pops, will the whole U.S. economy go with it? The concern isn't simply academic. Over the last 3 years, since the launch of GPT 3.50, American markets have been climbing one monumental wave. But a closer look reveals that nearly 1/3 of the entire S&P 500's value now comes from just 7 companies, almost all riding the AI surge. NVIDIA has become the face of this concentration. Its chips power roughly 90% of the world's AI systems, its valuation has skyrocketed past several $1 trillion, and its influence is so dominant that its stock performance alone can move global markets. But behind the scenes, the company has been engaging in what analysts call circular investments, pouring billions into AI firms that then use that money to turn around and buy NVIDIA's chips. Goldman Sachs now estimates that up to 15% of NVIDIA's sales next year could come from this closed financial loop. Meanwhile, American tech giants have been borrowing heavily, issuing record volumes of corporate bonds to keep up with the exorbitant costs of new data centers, facilities that, according to recent reporting, now cost more to build than all other U.S. manufacturing projects combined. These centers require staggering amounts of electricity, cooling, land, and infrastructure, yet many of the companies behind them continue to lose money at breathtaking speed. OpenAI, for example, is forecasted to lose more than $70 billion over the next 3 years, even as its valuation approaches $500 billion. All of this raises a simple, uncomfortable question. How long can the U.S. economy ride a wave built almost entirely on expectations rather than profits? President Trump routinely points to the stock market as proof of American strength. But peel back the surface and it becomes clear that the market's resilience depends overwhelmingly on a handful of tech giants. If AI spending slows or investor optimism fades, the repercussions will be felt across the entire economy. This isn't just about a volatile sector. It's about the foundational role that tech now plays in America's financial system. As one analyst put it, tech stocks aren't just driving the market, they are the market. The AI sector also carries a paradox that traditional industries don't face. The more customers these companies gain, the more money they lose. Every query costs energy. Every model update requires thousands of new chips. Every training run demands massive capital outlays. The entire industry is built on the assumption that profitability will eventually arrive, somehow, someday, through a breakthrough in automation or artificial general intelligence. But investors are beginning to wonder how long they can subsidize the promise.
This is where Canada's story becomes compelling. While the United States doubles down on AI speculation, Canada is grounding its future in assets that generate lasting value. Ottawa is expanding a clean energy grid that already sits at 85% emissions-free. Provinces are building high-voltage transmission links to move power across regions. New LNG corridors are emerging on both coasts. Critical mineral mines are being fast-tracked through the Major Projects Office. And Canada is deepening partnerships across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe to diversify trade away from an increasingly unpredictable United States. This contrast could not be sharper. The U.S. AI sector consumes electricity at a pace that utilities across multiple states now warn is unsustainable. Some regions are facing energy shortages, construction delays, and grid instability. Canada, by comparison, has decades of surplus hydroelectricity, vast potential for wind and nuclear, and the ability to export power-intensive products the world actually needs. When Prime Minister Mark Carney calls Canada an energy and resource superpower, it isn't rhetoric. It is a statement rooted in geography, engineering, and global demand.
There is a geopolitical dimension here that often gets overlooked. Trump's second-term strategy, his tariffs, his pressure on allies, his America First negotiations, all hinge on the U.S. economy staying strong enough to absorb the blowback. But if the AI bubble even partially deflates, that leverage collapses. A 10% correction in tech could wipe out trillions in market value. A deeper drop would push the United States toward recession. And because tech makes up nearly half the value of American equities, the shock would cascade through pensions, banks, and global markets. Trump needs the AI surge to hold. He needs the Magnificent Seven to keep climbing. He needs investors to believe the future payoff will justify today's extraordinary spending. But the fundamentals tell a different story. AI models age quickly. Chips become obsolete within a few years, and the infrastructure decays faster than any traditional industry. That is not a stable foundation. It is a pressure point waiting for a trigger.
And this is where Canada's national confidence is rising. Canada's strength is rooted not in speculation, but in tangible value, vast natural gas reserves, strategic mineral deposits, immense hydro capacity, emerging Arctic trade routes, and a clean power industrial base that companies around the world want to tap into. These are assets that don't burst or deflate because they aren't tied to investor psychology. They are tied to physical demand. While Trump leans on the Magnificent Seven, Canada is building coalitions with South Korea, the UAE, Asian nations, Japan, and the European Union. The U.S. is concentrating risk, Canada is distributing opportunity. If the American AI gamble falters, Canada becomes one of the safest, most stable, most energy-rich economies in the Western world, and the global market will notice.
There is an even deeper implication. If the AI bubble weakens, Trump's political model weakens with it. His tariff threats lose power. His economic narrative loses credibility. His ability to pressure allies diminishes. A market crash wouldn't just shake Wall Street, it would shake the geopolitical hierarchy of North America. The question that will define the next decade isn't whether AI will change the world. It will. The question is whether the payoff arrives before the correction. If it arrives, the United States will soar. But if the correction hits first, America will face an economic shock unlike anything since 2008. Canada isn't waiting for that answer. It is building a resilient future now, one rooted in clean power, critical minerals, diversified trade, and real assets that don't evaporate when a bubble bursts. In a world obsessed with prediction, Canada is preparing for reality, and that may be the smartest move of all.
This is Hanwha's KSS-3 submarine, launched into the sea just in time for the Prime Minister's visit. Mark Carney climbed down 7 meters to check out what the South Koreans want Canada to buy.
When you walk through the Hanwha Ocean Shipyard in South Korea, you can feel the weight of industry. Towering cranes, welding sparks, and steel hulls taking shape on the water. It is one of the largest shipyards in Asia, 5 square kilometers of pure precision and ambition. And in late October 2025, amid that metallic rhythm, one visitor stood out: Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Cameras followed him as he toured the submarine line that could soon redefine Canada's Navy. Hanwha Ocean is one of 2 finalists competing to replace Canada's aging Victoria-class submarines. The South Koreans promised 12 new KS-3 boats, 4 by 2035, if a deal is signed by 2026. That single image, Carney standing among South Korean engineers, carried more meaning than a press statement ever could. While Donald Trump was in another city warning allies to buy American and tightening tariff walls, Carney was moving in the opposite direction. He was in Asia, exploring technology and partnerships the United States could no longer offer. For Canada, this wasn't just a defense procurement trip. It was a declaration of independence, an unmistakable signal that Ottawa is no longer waiting for Washington's permission to modernize.
The story behind Carney's visit runs deeper than submarines. It reflects a global realignment, now visible from Ottawa to Seoul. In recent years, South Korea has earned a new nickname, the Arsenal of Democracy. Once a nation rebuilt from the ashes of war, it is now on course to become the world's 4th largest weapons exporter. Korean firms have delivered artillery to Poland, tanks to Australia, and air defense systems to NATO allies. Now, they are bidding to build Canada's next fleet of submarines, a contract worth between 20 and 24 billion US dollars. What makes Seoul's offer so attractive is speed and partnership. The KS-3 submarines are already operational for the Korean Navy. They can be built within the next decade using advanced robotics and modular construction. The proposal even includes technology transfer, crew training, and the creation of maintenance facilities on Canadian soil. It's not a one-off transaction. Seoul's Deputy Defense Minister has called it a long-term partnership aimed at strengthening Canada's own defense industry. That approach stands in sharp contrast to traditional American deals, which often keep production and intellectual property inside the U.S. border. For Carney, the choice is symbolic. By engaging South Korea, Canada is signaling to the world and to Washington that it will not be confined to a single industrial orbit. It is building new supply chains and friendships in Asia, where technology and cooperation come without the constant shadow of tariffs and political strings. To understand why this moment matters, we need to look at what's happening on the other side of the Pacific. Since returning to the White House, President Trump has rebuilt his economic playbook around protectionism. Under the America First agenda, his administration has imposed sweeping import taxes ranging from 10 to 100%. Canada has been hit particularly hard, facing a 25% tariff on most industrial goods and an additional 10% on energy. For Ottawa, those measures have disrupted trade worth over $120 billion annually. Instead of retaliating, Carney's government chose a more strategic path. It began shifting Canada's defense and technology partnerships towards Asia, where nations like South Korea and Japan were eager to cooperate without political tension. That shift is not just economic. It's geopolitical. Every submarine Canada builds with Seoul, every maintenance contract it signs outside the U.S. is a quiet rebalance of power. It chips away at Washington's decades-long dominance over North American industry. In short, Trump's tariffs have accelerated exactly what he hoped to prevent: the diversification of Western allies away from U.S. factories. By pushing partners to the edge, the White House has forced them to find new routes, and Canada is proving that independence can be a strategy, not a risk.
It's hard to miss the symbolism. At the end of October, both Donald Trump and Mark Carney were in South Korea, but for entirely different missions. Trump met President Lee Jae-myung to finalize a $350 billion U.S.-Korea trade framework focused on reshoring and tight supply chain control. Carney, meanwhile, visited GOJ, where Korean engineers built submarines for their own navy. Two Western leaders, one country, two opposite visions. Trump came to enforce American terms, Carney came to forge new ones. One relied on tariffs, the other on trust. This contrast captures the fracture in today's Western order. The old model, Washington dictates, allies follow, is breaking apart. Canada's outreach to South Korea represents a new approach, where middle powers collaborate directly and trade capability, not obedience. As Trump's motorcade departed Seoul, Carney's team entered Hanwha's shipyard. For historians, it might mark the week Canada stopped orbiting Washington and started steering its own course in Asia.
A year ago, Canada seemed like a casualty of Trump's trade war. Tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber cut exports and threatened jobs. Economists warned of long-term damage. But by late 2025, the narrative has flipped. Instead of pleading for tariff relief, Canada is rebuilding through new alliances. Deals with Japan, South Korea, and Australia now anchor its industrial strategy. Partnerships that share technology instead of imposing restrictions. The submarine talks are more than procurement. They represent who controls the engines of innovation. If the deal goes through, it will bring thousands of jobs, advanced robotics training, and new supply chain opportunities inside Canada. More importantly, it proves that Canada can prosper outside America's shadow. Trump's tariffs tried to isolate Ottawa, but instead propelled it toward a network of Asian democracies eager for cooperation. Government officials expect the first submarines by 2035, the same year the USMCA review is due. By then, Canada's defense network could stretch from Vancouver to Busan, not just from Ottawa to Washington. The message is clear. While the US builds walls, Canada builds bridges. Partnership has replaced dependency. Strategy has replaced fear. And as the clang of steel echoed through Hanwha shipyard, it symbolized something larger than a contract. The moment a nation reclaimed control of its industrial future.
From afar, it might look like an ordinary diplomatic visit. But in the global story of 2025, Carney's stop in South Korea speaks volumes. It shows that alliances are shifting and that middle powers like Canada can redefine their destiny without waiting for Washington. In a world dominated by tariffs and trade wars, this submarine project isn't just about ships under the sea, it's about a country surfacing with a new sense of confidence. Because while others build barriers, Canada is quietly forging steel, and with it, a new path forward.